So where to begin? Well, I guess my name is, my nickname I say sometimes is Kevin. My real name is Kahnawake. And like a lot of people in this community, I didn't know anything about traditionalism growing up as a kid. We were indoctrinated in the schools about that was our ways and these were the things that we were supposed to do, and I didn't know any better. And I went along with that. But then there were certain times in my life as a little boy growing up and different things that I questioned and all that, and all of a sudden it seemed like there was a void, that there was something not fulfilling in some of those teachings. And to compound the problem further, we get into a high school system. We're learning a curriculum that is not our ways based or anything like that. And the next thing we get into evolution. That, well, maybe there is no such thing as a great spirit, that we developed from monkeys and this whole chain of evolution. So then there was also a point in my life, and I would talk to different people in the community about the big mystery. When we internalize in our own minds, God, Creator, Great Spirit, what does this all mean? And there were some people in the community when I spoke to that would say, no such thing as that. You have this life, live a good life as much as possible. There's a lot of beautiful things out there. Go and enjoy it. Because when the time will come when you leave this place, you don't know what lies in store after death. So that plagued me. There were a lot of things when I would make decisions or try to make decisions for myself, and as a result of not really knowing, I made mistakes. And I'm up here today, and if anybody would look at my background, they'll say, well, who is this guy to speak anyway? But nevertheless, life is a learning process, and hopefully we learn from things that have happened in the past to try and make us better people. And so that's a little bit about me, and here I am today. Like everyone else, all of a sudden I received this letter in the mail, and all of a sudden I'm invited to be a participant in this telling our story. And beside my name it says traditional elder. And I said to myself, well, I says to a degree, I'd be happy to participate and share what little bit I know about telling our story. But then, with all due respect, I don't know if I am an elder, because I know what constitutes an elder and how you attain that, and I don't know if I'm there yet. But anyways, here I am, and whatever little bit that I'm going to share with you today, hopefully, that you leave this discussion with a little bit of a better understanding about who we are and telling our story. But at the same time, in telling this story, maybe there might be something about it that is not only our story, but it's society's story. It's the brotherhood of man's story. And when I came in here and I looked around and I seen the 4 circles representing the 4 races of men, and then I already decided how I was going to more or less try and put some things into perspective of telling our story. I guess to begin with, I have a teaching aid. I guess since I am a teacher, I'm involved in language and culture. But in my travels and all the different peoples that I've met, Iroquois people, because we never had a form of written language, we always had teaching aids. And I will go back to the beginning of time, when the races of man was made, and our ancestors were having discussions with the Great Spirit, and he was beginning to tell us about what is going to be our duties and responsibilities here on this earth walk. And there was a time when our people experienced death, the first time, because they didn't know what that was. And it says that at that time, there was one from amongst those original few people that were made, that when they experienced death, that a messenger was sent from the Great Spirit, and he told them what this actually means, when we're going to die and when we're going to pass on. And it says in this oral tradition and in this story, it says that the Great Spirit said, That just like there are all different markings on this stick, and that's how it should be with us. When we come into this world, we have a certain amount of pegs, which can be considered our days and our time here. And all of a sudden, there's so many marks, or there's so many nicks or notches in that stick, and when that stick has run its course, then that's it. Now that thing that people call a spirit, or a soul, it's got heat to it. It's alive, it's a living thing, because I know as an individual, when I go like this and I feel myself, I can feel that heat. It's got warmth. I know it's got almost something to do in our ways that talks about a fire. But eventually that fire will leave, and this will become cool and it'll go back to dirt. And when that time will happen, it just means that I've run out of the notches or the sticks, the notches that represent so many days in my life, and I have no control over that. But the thing that I do know is that thing that we call maybe a dunhets, or our spirit or our soul, goes back to where it came. And where that came, the only thing that we are told, it goes back to the master of life that was responsible for all these things. So there we have it, talking about death, and that we know that we have a certain amount of time, when that time is up, and then we go back home. So now in that beginning of that story, and at that time, it says that the races of man were gathered, and the Great Spirit was given them the instructions of how we are to live and how we are going to carry out on this earth walk. What is this big mystery? What is our role? What are duties? What are responsibilities? So on and so forth. And we do know that before man was ever even thought of to be placed here, that there were gifts of elements that we received. And those are represented here by those certain colors, and it's represented too by the brotherhood of man. Because man was the last thing that was made, that was created. Everything else, the water, the earth, the soil, and all those things were already all made. And in the Great Spirit's mind, the last thing that he would make that would complete this creation would be people that would have responsibilities to carry out. And everything was provided for us. And those gifts of elements we all know. We have the gift of earth. We have the gift of air. We have the gift of water. And we have the gift of fire. So we might look at that and we could say, well, that's good. But all those things were necessary for men to live, because everything has a duty and a responsibility for that continuation of life. Now it says at that time the Great Spirit, when he was making mankind, that he said that within these gifts that each and every one of us would have a certain responsibility to watch over one of those gifts. And in our thinking, and as we would go on in this journey, that we would share this knowledge, so that there would always be peace, harmony, and balance in the earth. And in those gifts, he decided that there would be certain people that would have a certain responsibility to watch over these gifts and to share that knowledge and to make sure that the peace and the harmony and the balance would continue. So we are told in our way that the red man was given the responsibility to watch the earth. The black man was given the responsibility to watch over the water. The white man was given the responsibility to watch the fire. And the yellow man was given the responsibility over air. And all these elements that we need are still here and continue to do their duties and responsibilities, because life would always go on. But along the line, something began to happen. For whatever intents and purpose, we don't know. We could maybe just allude to it, and that's why I said maybe in some of these things that I'm talking about, we could relate to it and say, well, it's our story. Or at the same time, you can look at it and say, well, it's just Kevin and his story from a native perspective. But it's food for thought. But anyways, we're going to leave from the beginning of time now, when the races of man was made and they were put in their respective homeland to carry out their duties and responsibilities. In our history, as Longhouse people, there was a time in our history too that maybe we could look as a time that was bleak for our people. in that people were not united. There was a lot of, there was no more real peace that was being shared, the good tidings of peace and power and all this. And it says in our ways that when the Great Spirit looked down into these certain lands where He made us, that His heart was saddened by what He's seen. And what He decided to do was that He would send a messenger that would come amongst our people to bring a message of peace. And we all know, and some people have already talked about it. We talk about the Longhouse ways, we talk about our Constitution, we talk about all these things that we know when we go about the Longhouses, not only here in Mohawks, but right up to the Senecas and the Tuscaroras, that there are certain things that we talk, that we share about, that binds us together. There's commonalities, because when we go back to our own teachings, there's a lot of things in there that gives us that collective common mind. But one of the things that does happen, even though we have all our spirituality, we have our duties and our responsibilities, one of the things that that I see, where I was able to relate to these gifts, and even when this great peacemaker came amongst our people, because we talk about clan system. Clan system was also a way where families were able to conduct their affairs and to come to a mind. And then in those families, regardless of how many they were of those certain clans, they would select women and men who would be the spokesperson to watch over. Because even though it's 5 nations of one family, it still can be broken down, that the root of it comes down to simple family structure between man, woman, and children. But it's just expanded on into a nation. But anyways, when we look at our teaching, we know that in Mohawk, and the same thing with Oneidas, is we have 3 principal clans, which end up is that they are bear, turtle, and wolf. We go down a little further, we come to the Onondagas, and then we see now we have Deer Clan. We have Beaver Clan. That's in the Onondaga Nation. When we come down to the Cayugas, then we have another clan. We have Snipe, and we have Heron. And finally, when we get to the Seneca Nation, we have Hawk and Snipe. Now you might be wondering, and you're saying, okay, so that's good, you just rattled off a couple of clans. Maybe if you're keeping count, there are 9 of them. But what does that mean? It means that if you look into those 9 clans, they can be divided into these things. Or you have 3 clans that have a responsibility to earth, because they are always on the earth. And that'll be the Deer Clan, the Beaver Clan, the Deer Clan, the Wolf Clan, and the Bear Clan, because they're always principally on the land. So we look at the water life, and what type of animals live in that water. So we'll find out that we have Turtle Clan, we have Beaver Clan, and we have Eel Clan. Next thing we look at, air. What is air? Well, we know birds are associated with air because most of them can fly. So what clans are associated with air? We have Hawk, Heron, and Snipe. So you might be sitting there and you might be wondering, yeah, okay, but that's only 3. Where's the 4th one? Where is fire? But we know that any time in our ways, when any time a gathering takes place, someone will always stand up and address the people and begin with an opening prayer, meaning that he opens it. The people who are delegated to counsel on the affairs of the people, we say that they're the Titzahan. It means where that fire is, they're counseling, they're talking about the fire. The fire is the affairs of the people. So that's all in our ways. Those things are all interconnected. And at the same time, this great hero, this great peacemaker that came amongst our people, he also taught us that in these ways that we would have a democracy, that we would have a form of government where the decision-making process would be held collectively by all the people that would have a say in the decision-making process. Now, just looking at that model and that concept, I don't know, but when I look at some of the governments of the world today, I think maybe they have a lot to learn, that if some of these basic principles that was laid out thousands of years ago for us, if they could begin to establish a government. First of all, you would not only have just one race of people, you would have 4 races of people that would be sitting together, united. Those people would know their traditional teachings that would go right back to the beginning of time, that in their ceremonies and in their rituals that they do for the continuance of all life, that they still understood it, and that they can collectively come to an understanding in a mind of how to solve the problems of the day. And at the same time, by the people that they represent, when it comes back from the voice of the people, that the decisions would come from people that are associated with water. Protect that water life, because it's very precious. That's the greatest gift, one of the greatest gifts that the Great Spirit gave to our people. The breath that we need every second to survive, the air is getting contaminated. So the people that would have representatives sitting in on behalf of the air, that they would make sure that those interests would really be understood and taken into consideration. And then with the land, and then with the fire. So that finally, if that was ever achieved, in my mind anyway, and looking at those traditional teachings, if we had a worldwide government that was based on those teachings and those philosophies, then I see that there is a lot of hope that maybe we can begin to reverse some of the negative impacts that mankind has had on the Earth Mother. But then again, who knows? It's up to us. When we look outside this building and we see that this is God's creation, and through creation, this is how He reveals Himself to us, because everything has a life. We can go back to the beginning. When we go in our way to the upper world, we talk about a great tree. There are other cultures in this world too that have a similar teaching that talks about a tree. Some call it a tree of life, some call it a tree of peace, some call it it's got different names, but we always talk about the trees, and it seems like it's got a commonality about it, because other nations understand that concept. But why is that then a universal concept? Because this is my interpretation, and other people share the same view, that trees are givers of life. We know that in our creation story. We know that when a child comes into the world, first thing that we need is that sacred breath, that first breath. And then the trees, our homes was built with it. It gave us fire. It gave us implements of a lot of different things, the wood that is in all those different things that we use. And just recently, last week, we just finished dancing to creation to the maple tree that is the leader of the tree life, that we are happy and we are grateful that those trees are still carrying out their duty and their responsibility because they give us life. Because if I wanted to refuse that water, well, that's pretty easy. If I decide I don't want to have my supper tonight, I can give that up too. If all of a sudden someone came up to me and says, "Hey Kevin, I want to take your breath," then that's a whole different thing, because breath is the very thing that I need every second of my life until I'm going to pass on from this place. Now, where does that breath come from? It goes back to trees. When this great peacemaker came amongst our people, and he says, these laws and these ways that I have completed, he says, I'm going to go into the forest and I'm going to wrap myself in bark. What does that mean? What did he actually say like that? That when we go into the forest, if we cut down a tree, then the peacemaker will reveal himself. It goes beyond that. And what in essence it says is that through the trees, with every single breath that we take, that is how the Holy Spirit will enter our body. We say that God is every place, He's everywhere. That's true, and that's right. Scientists talk about elements, H2O. They say even in water that there is air. Now when we look at that concept of air, everything that is alive needs air. From the fishes into the ocean, this whole thing is touched by air. Every breath that we take is how the Great Spirit enters our body, understands our mind, our thoughts, and what is in our hearts. And when you look at everything is breathing. In our ceremonies and in our way, we talk about the heartbeat of the people is in that drum. That's true. We can talk about the heartbeat of the Great Spirit and different things in creation is in that turtle rattle when we sing the Great Spirit song. But if we just get away from some of those things and put it in a more broader perspective, imagine right now in unison, everybody's chest is expanding and contracting. Every living thing. And that's a beautiful thing when you can understand, because that's the beat of life that is happening constantly, and we all see it. It's like an orchestra that is happening and taking place, because that breath is coming in and it's going out. And that's how the Great Spirit and our traditional teaching is touched by everything, because everything is interconnected. It's in the land, it's in the animals, it's in the people. Everything that we see is part of God's creation, and that's how He reveals Himself to us. So when I came into these traditional teachings, and I began to walk that road, that was paramount for me. Because now this concept of what we say, when we talk about Great Spirit, where is it? How do we see it? Can we feel it? Can we touch it? It's everywhere. And that was inspiring. The next thing now, I talked about death, and I'm going to end with death, because it's something that people seems like they're afraid to talk about. But in our traditional teachings, we know that the sun is one of our greatest teachers. The reason being is that when we see that sun come up out of the earth, it looks like it reaches the midway point, and the sun begins to set, and it looks like it goes back into the earth. At the beginning of time, when the races of man was made, the Great Spirit said that He took the earth and He put into the nostrils, and He said we became Ngwe Ngwe. And just like that sun, we came out of the earth, but then we're going to sit and we're going to go back into that earth. But that thing that is here, that warmth, that heat, whatever you want to call it, spirit, soul, that's going to go back to where it came. But the guarantee that the sun teaches us in this is that tomorrow His face comes up again. And even though I came out of the earth and I'm here temporarily and I'm going to sit one day, but my spirit will go back to where it came. And we have everlasting life. It's already in our teachings. It tells us all this. So, one other thing that I'd just like to share, because I've always gone to elders' conferences, and I always listen. When Ernie was speaking, you see me take notes and different things like that, because there are certain things that elders have always said that I retain that knowledge and that information, and if I'm asked to say something, then I talk about it again. But this one elder that I just recently met, we were having a discussion, and he was telling me, he says, he said, my whole talk today is going to be about death, he says, because people don't like to talk about that. But he says, I like to talk about that. He says, because in the community where I'm from, somewhere in South Dakota, he says there was even a time that they knew of, and there were still some people today that they can literally think and shut down their own processes that tells the mind to keep his heart pumping, and they could decide when they wanted to leave this place. And I was listening to what he was saying, and I was fascinated by his talk, because I had never heard that before. But anyway, being a world traveler as he was, he just came back from Trinidad, he was in Germany, he was in Russia, he was all over. He was in South America, and he was saying that in all these different places that he goes, he says, one of the things that seems to be a recurring theme, he says, and this is with all nations of people, he says they have what is known as out-of-body experiences. Now he says people experience it in different forms. Some people may be in an operating room table and temporarily pass on. In the sweat lodges and on vision quests and all that, there are powerful dreams that people will have, that messengers may come to them and tell them, give them insight into the future, tell them about their own personal life or what have you. But some of those things are performed where later on the mind tries to say, was that just my mind playing tricks on me, or was this something that was real? But regardless, so he analyzed that, and he says, what happens, he says, and even himself, and where I was able to connect with that, because there were people that I knew in my time, that when they got into the next world, some of them were my own immediate people and family, that while they were on this earth, they would argue with me. They would say, well, Kevin, some of these things that you talk about, I don't want to accept it. I don't even want to believe it. And I said, that's fine, because we all have the right to choose in this earth. But I says, one thing that we do know about our ways is that, and this is not only our ways, but in any culture, it doesn't matter, any culture that you go to on the whole face of this earth, within their traditional teachings, there's only so much knowledge and wisdom that was given, and it's up to us to accept it or reject it, because we have free choice. So I says, but all the things that we question, about the big mystery, God, Great Spirit, Creator. I said, it's never going to get answered, because there's only so much that we can comprehend with this mind. But I says, when we're going to pass on and go into the other side, then that's when all these things will be revealed, because we will meet the Master of Life. And I says, only when we get to the other side will we know. And then what has happened to me since that time, through dreams, there were people that have come to me and that were asking certain things that needed to be done as far as how we deal with our people, as far as death is concerned. And these things have to be done. If not, then like sickness could start to happen, and various things. And that again had a pretty profound effect on me when some of these things started to happen, because at first I was afraid of it. I didn't understand these things and all that. But as it started, and then it seems like after that it just started to happen, where different things I got involved with. And today, now I understand it, and I know that these things are important for us anyway, and we still carry these things on. So now getting back to this Phil Lane, who was a Lakota, he says, he said, in this concept, well, not concept, but in this thing that people call death and that they fear, he says, in these people that are in operating room tables and die, he says, and when they get there, he says, some people refer to seeing a great light. Some people may even see their loved ones that have gone, their grandparents or maybe even their parents, and they see them. But for some unknown reason, it seems like there's a barrier where they can't get there. Some people liked it so much that they wish they could have stayed there. But in all these so-called out-of-body experiences, these people are told to come back. And they do come back, and then after that, their whole perception about life and about death is drastically been changed, because now they don't fear it, they understand it, they see things in a different perspective. So he carries on in his speech, and what he said was that, well, let's just look at what these people say. He says, sure, he says, a lot of times it seems like they go through a tunnel, and then in that tunnel they can see that other world where we're going to go one day when we pass on. But he says, let's go to conception, and let's look and see what happens at that time too. So he says, when conception starts, and that child begins to grow within the womb of that mother, eventually what happens is it starts to get cramped in there, that child is growing and he wants to come out. And essentially what happens is there is a tunnel, but when we play with words, sometimes it's referred to as a birth canal. And in that birth canal, what happens, that child travels, he goes through that tunnel and he comes into this world, this life that we know. But while he's inside his mother, he didn't need his hands, he didn't need his feet. All he needed was that basic thing where he gets all his nourishment, which was his umbilical cord. And certain things, well, the structure of what we're going to look like had to be intact. But there are a lot of things that we didn't need. It's only when we came into this earth that we see the reason for having hands and arms and feet and legs and so on and so forth. But if we look back, and what this one elder was saying, he says, if that's what took us to get here, and you look at these other out-of-body experiences and what happens, then he says that's how it's going to be too when we're going to leave this place. And he says that's why some people refer to as going through a tunnel, because if it was through a tunnel that God is here, then it's through a tunnel that we're going to go when we get to the next world, and all those things that we know will be waiting there for us. So that's just a little bit of some of the things that I know, and my time is up now, and as I said, I'm here today to share a little bit about what
the people, to the plants, our medicines, which grow on the earth, to the waters that flow with lifebloods and nourish the plants and people, to the air, especially the winds that allow us to breathe, to the trees that purifies the air, to the animals, our four-legged brothers, who also sustain us, to the birds, our winged brothers, who sing to the Creator, to the sun, our elder brother, who warms the earth and provides light.